Thank you all so much for attending this session of Gems from the Wisdom Traditions, a conversation circle. And we are so glad to include all of you in this circle of discussion we'll be having on the topic of irreversible resolve. And to speak on this topic, we thought about how much resolve a physician has to have to take care of his or her patients, and also about the Hippocratic oath that physicians take before embarking on their practice. And so in my personal experience, Dr. Mark Morisaki is somebody who really exemplifies the dedication to healing others to the best extent possible. And it's not just a matter of working on the body. He really understands the whole person needs to be addressed for proper healing. And so he's also, in addition to being a doctor who does work on the body, he's also an educator and someone who lets people be more informed about the condition that they're in so that they can be wiser participants as a patient in their own healing process. And I have seen him do this not only in, actually I've never been to his office, come to think of it. I've always seen him in other contexts helping to heal people, including in emergency rooms and hospital rooms at 3 a.m., unpaid. And that's the kind of doctor that I would like to present to you. And I think Doris is going to say just a few more specific words about Mark as a doctor. Thank you, Mark and Doris.
Thank you. Aloha, everybody. So nice to have you join us today. I just wanted to give you a little background on Mark. He did his undergrad studies at the University of Southern California and went to medical school at the Sackler School of Medicine in Tel Aviv, Israel. So Tel Aviv University is where he got his training and went to medical school. And then he did his internship, residency, and fellowship in the New York area, Staten Island, Queens, Brooklyn area. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce my husband of 30 years. We just celebrated our 30th anniversary this past summer, Mark Morisaki.
Thank you, Doris. And thank you, Renee, for always your encouragement and this opportunity. I agree with you. I think this is a great place to start this discussion would be going over the oath of Hippocrates. This is going back into the ancient Greece, and I think it's a good starting point. This is something that goes back to the 5th century, 25 BC. There's a picture of it. Let me read through it, and then I'll kind of comment on some of the portions that I think are interesting. I swear by Apollo, the physician, by Aesculapius, Hygieia, and Panacea, and I take to witness all the gods, all the goddesses, to keep according to my ability and judgment the following oath. To consider dear to me as my parents him who taught me this art, to live in common with him, and if necessary, to share my goods with him, to look upon his children as my own brothers, to teach them this art if they so desire without fee or written promise, to impart to my sons and the sons of the master who taught me, and to the disciples who have enrolled themselves and have agreed to the rules of the profession, but to these alone, the precepts and the instruction. I will prescribe regimen for the good of my patients according to my ability and my judgment, and never do harm to anyone. To please no one will I prescribe a deadly drug, nor give advice which may cause his death, nor will I give a woman a pessary to procure abortion, but I will preserve the purity of my life and my art. I will not cut for stone, even for patients in whom the disease is manifest. I will leave this operation to be performed by specialists in this art. In every house where I come, I will enter only for the good of my patient, keeping myself far from all intentional ill-doing and all seduction, and especially from the pleasures of love with women or with men, be they free or slaves. All that may come to my knowledge in the exercise of my profession or outside of my profession, or in daily commerce with men, which ought not to be spread abroad, I will keep secret and never reveal. If I keep this oath faithfully, may I enjoy my life and practice my art, respected by all men and in all times. But if I swerve from it or violate it, may the reverse be my lot. Okay, well, I'll tell you, going over this really was just eye-opening. Some things I wanted to comment. Well, first, they're swearing to these different gods. Apollo, who is one of the most important of the Greek gods. He's the god of healing and diseases. So that seems appropriate. His son, Aesculapius, was given the gift of medicine and arts of healing. He's also known, his symbol is the rod of Aesculapius, which is that serpent around a staff. And that's credited for development of the modern day symbol for medicine, the caduceus. And it's interesting, there's many thoughts on how it is that became the symbol for medicine. And one thought was, well, it kind of shows when snakes shed their skin, it's kind of like a rebirth. So that's one idea. Another was early medicine. One of the problems they had were snake bites, so early medicine was equated with something like that. But I guess the story that I find fascinating anyway is one about a parasite that was around during that time. There's this parasite that is ingested and eventually develops into a worm, and it makes its way underneath the skin. And it would eventually erupt out of the skin, usually around the legs, and cause great pain. So the early remedy for that was to take a stick, and as the worm emerged, they would wrap it around the stick so it couldn't reverse and go back inside. And little by little, as the worm would come out, they would wrap it some more, and that could take up to 1 week to do this. You can see how that's coming out. These worms, just absolutely fascinating. They could get up to 1 yard in length. So it could take some time to do it. Early medicine, so there's thought that could have been the kind of pictogram of the rod of Aesculapius. And then going on, now he had 2 daughters, Hygeia and Panacea. And the 2 daughters, I think it's especially timely now that we talk about their gifts that they were given. Hygeia was the goddess of cleanliness and health. And in this pandemic, these are things that are very important, very focused for us. That's where we get the word hygiene from, and sanitation. Panacea is the goddess of universal remedy. So between the four of them, these doctors would be pledging their oath. Now, the next part is interesting to consider dear to me as my parents, him who taught me this art, to live in common with him, and if necessary, to share my goods with him. You're pledging a binding covenant for this guy that teaches you. And that makes sense during that time in ancient Greece, because in ancient Greece, there were no medical schools. There were no institutions. If you wanted to become a doctor, you found the physician that was practicing at that time. And you hoped that he would agree to teach you his skills. And so you would find, it's almost like an apprentice. You would follow him, you would do with him, you would learn from him. And as a result, you would be indebted to him for your livelihood. So that makes sense. And that brings up the word doctor, comes from the Latin docere, which means to teach. And that's what the early doctors were. They were teachers. You had to teach the next generation in order to keep this going. And I'm especially fond of that because I'm very fond of the teaching aspect. So I thought, well, this is a half-page document. So anything that's put in there has to be pretty important, because there's a lot of other things you might have thought about putting in, but this is what made the final cut. Further down, it talks about, it's amazing that issues that were deemed significant in the 5th century BC, so much so that they put it into this covenant, are still issues that we're grappling with today. 2 of them: to please no one will I prescribe a deadly drug, nor give advice which may cause his death. Assisted suicide. Nor will I give a woman a pessary, which is the instrument that they insert into the vagina, to procure abortion. And I think the portion of this that surprises me the most is toward the end of the oath, where it says, all that may come to my knowledge in the exercise of my profession or outside of my profession, or in daily commerce with men, which ought not to be spread abroad, I will keep secret and never reveal. That's patient privacy. They thought so much of that they put that in here. And this is 5th century BC, and they were thinking about patient's privacy, which to me is just incredible. And this is a time, although they're a very advanced society in many ways, this is a time that's very early on in medicine, where the life expectancy was about 35 years. And here they're thinking about privacy, patient's privacy. Just incredible, incredible. Well, I think that's a good place to pause for a moment, and I wanted to get back more on track with the Irreversible Resolve. And I'll hand it over to Doris for a moment.
So this week's theme of Irreversible Resolve was so appropriate for Mark. We met the summer before he left for medical school in Israel. So I've walked beside him a good part of his journey to become a medical doctor. He's always wanted to become a physician ever since he was a little boy. And although it hasn't been easy, there has very much been that irreversible resolve. So I'm really proud of him for that. However, from whom did he get this steely resolve from? I'd like to talk about his father, retired Los Angeles physician, Michael Morisaki. So my father-in-law was born in Wailuku, Maui in 1927. And his mother got a divorce and left the family, leaving behind Michael and his older brother, who were ages 3 and 6, respectively. Their father, who worked long hours, could not care for 2 young boys in 1930s Maui. So he placed them in an orphanage. It was during this time that little Michael met a doctor and decided that he wanted to become one too. During his teenage years, he would spend his summers on Lanai, picking pineapple and harvesting sugarcane. He would earn twice as much as anyone else because of his hustle. He would pick pineapples, filling a large bag, and then run down the dirt lane and dump off his load and run back and pick like crazy all day long in the hot Hawaiian sun. When it was time to cut the crown and the base off of the pineapple, instead of doing it with 2 whacks, apparently he did it, with 1 stroke to cut the top and the bottom off of each pineapple. How he didn't chop off a finger or a hand, I have no idea. He did well at Baldwin High School, then went on to Marquette University in Wisconsin for his undergrad studies, and then medical school at Michigan University. For a young man who had never left Hawaii prior to that, I can only imagine how alien Wisconsin and Michigan were in 1940s America. He married fellow Mauian Helen Hieta, and they went on to have 6 children, settling in California. In addition to working for Kaiser Permanente during the day, he supplemented his income by doing night and weekend house calls, logging some 8,000 in the 1960s. This at a time with no cell phones, no pager, or GPS in Los Angeles proper. When my father-in-law was in his early 50s, he had somewhat of a midlife crisis. He remedied this by going to law school in the evening, keeping a full medical practice during the day while sending 4 kids to USC. He also studied ocean navigation. Their family had ever so brief dreams of doing the Transpac one day, and also getting his real estate broker's license. After he retired, he studied several languages, waking up early every morning to listen to his cassette tapes. However, the greatest example of irreversible resolve for him was when Michael was nearly 78 years old. 3 months before the LA Marathon, he decides to enter it. Now, this is someone who had largely not exercised at all since high school 60 years prior. He crammed a year's worth of training in 3 months. And shortly before the race, even he had doubts about whether he should go through with this whim. However, he had already told so many people that he was going to do the LA Marathon that he felt he couldn't back out. Talk about irreversible resolve. Despite developing a hairline fracture on his tibia during the first mile of the race, he managed to somehow complete the marathon. I remember being on edge that day, wondering if we'd receive some kind of bad news. After all, with his advanced age, he had prepared so minimally for this race. Amazingly, he finished in 7 hours and 13 minutes and 50 seconds, finishing 13th out of 18 men in his age group. Not surprisingly, he couldn't walk for the next week following the marathon, but it was undoubtedly a proud accomplishment for him. Today, Mark's dad is 93 and still very sharp mentally. Thank you so much for listening. I'd like to open the floor for any comments or questions.
Thank you both so much. That was a fascinating presentation from a medical standpoint. It reminded me of really how old this this profession of healing people is. I remember going to an Egyptian museum, I think it's the Rosicrucians who run it outside of San Jose, California, and seeing mummies that had patches in their skull that had gold. And you could tell from the way that the bone had grown around the gold that they had done successful brain surgery and then the repair with that gold plate. And these are mummies that were several thousand years BCE. So when we are talking about wisdom traditions, we are talking about, in the medical field, a very, very, very old tradition, probably as old as mankind is. And so I really feel an appreciation for you taking us back and seeing how some of the threads from long, long ago still run through our healing profession today. For example, that idea of health, of cleanliness being associated with health in the goddess Aegea, and that a panacea was this idea of universal medicine that would heal everyone. What a wonderful idea. In a little bit of study that I have done, in a lot of ancient traditions, the serpent has to do, well, is often a symbol of wisdom. So a wise being is often represented as a serpent or even as a dragon. And so this also, like you pointed out, the shedding of its skin and the new life that comes along with it, that seems so symbolic. And then evidently there's something about that spiral, that helix, that's really important. And as we see it winding around the caduceus, we get reminded, for example, of what's going on at the level of our genes, right? So the antiquity and the wisdom that people had for healing, going back many, 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 many thousands of years, just brings about a certain awe. And you're bringing up how the oath, the first part of the oath is to pass it on, right? That I give my word that in gratitude for being taught the teachings of healing, I will pass it on to my children and to my teachers' children who may not have learned it yet. So I just want to give my gratitude for you bringing up all of those points. And in case it inspires any kind of questions or comments somebody else wants to make.
Mark, thank you so much for all of your comments, and Doris too. As I am listening and thinking about this topic of irreversible resolve, one thing that comes to mind is how we're so often trying to figure out, we have these commitments to certain things, but also sometimes we come across like situations in which we have to really be flexible, or we gain new information. And so maybe our original commitment is suddenly in question somehow. And so I think this is just in general something that we are always dealing with, right? How do we be resolved and have our vow, but also always be open to new information, changing information? I mean, you showed us these old documents. I think about how, you know, in our culture, there's a lot of discussion about old documents and, well, what was the spirit in which they were written, and how have things changed now? But also, like, we don't want to lose that spirit. But, you know, you're in the medical profession and you're seeing new information all the time. I wonder how you navigate this kind of very basic question, right? How do we keep our resolve, but also always be open to the new and always be flexible? So if you have any thoughts, I'd love to hear.
You're right. Every day we're learning things, and you have to pick up new information to keep up to date. Every day we're gaining more knowledge, and it kind of, that's really something that keeps me going, is to pick up that new knowledge. Cliff talked about the many phobias Gandhi had. And I kind of was glad to hear about that, because I guess I wouldn't say that mine are phobias because I haven't admitted to them yet, but they're fears or concerns, let's put it. One of them is just not being able to help someone because you didn't pick up that valuable information that could help them. And so you're almost driven to just keep on getting the latest data, the latest research studies, what other medical combinations might be helpful for this patient in this disease. So it's just been a constant driving thing. So you don't want to not be able to help because of your lack of knowledge. And on the other side of that, I think so many things from this initial covenant have not changed. They're of value. And I think one of the biggest ones is just the sense I got, and Renee mentioned this, was treating the patient as a whole, not just as a disease like diabetes or high blood pressure, but looking at the whole person and what's the best thing for them. And I felt like that was the, you know, kind of brought out in this. And we're still struggling with the same darn questions here, where we're trying to find a new person for the Supreme Court. And one of the topics that everyone's bringing up is abortion. And here, 25 BC, they had that same concern. And the privacy, Congress passed the bill that would make very important is the patient's privacy. And here, that's the same thing that they're thinking about back then. It's just fascinating to me that that would be such a prized thing for them to put in a covenant.
I was thinking that when you read the Hippocratic Oath, that it seemed like it could be considered like a foundation for medical ethics. And a lot of times you think of medicine as kind of being more like a matter of fact kind of realm of knowledge, where you have these symptoms and you diagnose it kind of like Sherlock Holmes, and you figure out what the right treatment is. And it's kind of like more analytical or kind of an objective realm of knowledge. But it seems like ethics has a big place in medicine. I just was thinking recently that, like at the CDC right now, with all this influence, political influence on these scientists at the CDC, they're being torn. There's whistleblowers, there's people quitting, but they're all being challenged ethically right now. Everyone that's like a career scientist at the CDC. So I was wondering if you could say something about in modern times, the importance of ethics, which ethics often has to do with resolves, irreversible resolves, ethics and medicine.
Boy, yeah, that's a great topic. I don't even know where to start now. You're right. I mean, the thing that bothered me recently was everyone's making a race to get a vaccine for the pandemic, and other countries are kind of spreading rumors about the ineffectiveness of other countries' vaccine, so that they could have the lead and, you know, get some financial gain. And it's just, wow, you would figure if you have the power to heal people, just open it up to everyone, you know, just let everyone have it. But it's just, it seems like that's not the case. You're right. You know, like we talked about last time, you just have to, where is your heart? Where, you know, that mother rule. What do you want? What would you want for your mother? That's the way that you should approach a person. I'm sure there's so many other things I could comment about that, but we'd start to take a whole different direction here. But yeah, I think you're absolutely right, Cliff. It's we have to constantly remind ourselves what's really important. Why did we get into this field?
I think we see Dr. Fauci, you know, really trying to hold his ground and really trying to hold, you know, trying to stick to the science, trying to, but, you know, in the current political climate, what a struggle that is, you know, in trying to set the record straight, trying to make sure that we have, you know, the most current information. And I think those of us who have not been, or who are not, you know, medical professionals, we've kind of, with this pandemic, we've kind of gotten a front row seat as far as, what the latest findings have been, you know, because we're so affected by this, all of us are. And so, you know, just staying up to date, you know, more recently, they're saying now that O blood type people tend to get less harsh outcomes with the COVID. And I think AB, tend to get put on a vent more, or, you know, they just kind of have a harder time with COVID. So just those kinds of information, we're, and in the, you know, at the very, very beginning, you know, how they said, you know, masks not necessary, but that might have been slightly, you know, supply demand motivated. But, you know, now of course, masks, but a good part of our country doesn't seem to believe in that. So, you know, it's just really been a challenge to stay on top of the latest findings on everything.
So Janine, you're right. You know, we just have to keep up to date on things and kind of and move along with that, but yet stay with that core value that we have. I wanted to mention on a different note, while I was preparing for this, I thought about Maurice's talk last time and about self-reliance. And this story came to me after a few decades. I had my first patient that I was assigned to, and this was in Israel. And so you're all excited, you have your textbook knowledge, and now it's time to apply it and go to the bedside and get all of this medical information from this patient. And so I was ready going there, and I introduced myself, and the wind was just completely taken out of my sails, because this lady who was my patient, I was responsible for her well-being, only spoke Polish. So now, you know, that sense of self-reliance, you have to get the job done. You don't, if you want her treated, this is your patient, you got to do what you need to do. So I had a a fellow student that spoke some Yiddish, which is kind of close and had some of the same vocabulary, but you know, he could only help me so much because he had his own patient. And now I don't speak Polish, but I speak a little French, and this patient's bedmate spoke a little bit of Polish and a little bit of French. So we were able to kind of make a deal if it's okay to share, you know, information, and she didn't mind, she wanted to get better. And so somehow we were able to get through that. And when the senior doctor came in, he says, this just reminds me of the Tower of Babel, you know, everyone's just speaking a different language here, but you got it done. That self-reliance, just you have to move on, you know.
It's a wonderful story. I was wondering, in regard to this idea of medical ethics, we can see that there's a lot of influence brought to bear by money, the pharmaceutical industries and so on. And partly, I imagine it's because of the price of malpractice insurance. Doctors' fees to traditionally, I mean, for the rest of us, we think of as doctors getting paid a lot of money. And I know that has changed over the years, by the way. But what I was wondering about, in olden times, for example, in Plato's Republic, those who were going to lead the state did so at no pay. And that was how they were kept free from corruption. They did this because it, you know, was their voluntary and acknowledgement of their duty to society to help lead the state. Was there something? Oh, and also I think, did Plato talk about teachers not getting paid very much? I think they weren't, it wasn't something to pay teachers a lot. Well, that continues to this day. But I wondered, was there something about doctors not getting super rich on that would help to kind of keep the profession pure, in the sense of only having principled human beings, you know, learning the profession? I mean, the oath in and of itself is pretty, you know, makes you toe the line. I just wondered if there was something about the finances.
I mean, certainly, as the fees go down, I guess that becomes less of an incentive. Almost, it kind of borders the opposite effect, where now, even if someone wanted to and their heart's in the right place, they almost don't want to get into medicine because of the amount of time and effort that it took, and the lack of reimbursement or payback. So I think there's a balance there someplace. For instance, for me, from high school, it took approximately 20 years of training to get to this point. And if the compensation for that, financial compensation, isn't there, it would be hard for that to happen. It's interesting that any teaching facility actually loses money on teaching the young doctors. It's not a financially beneficial thing for them, but I think they do it for the right reasons. They teach it so that they can continue to perpetuate the craft, and many of them don't stay at that teaching facility. So they're not doing it purely for themselves. I think they are doing it for the right reasons. Other examples, today in the hospitals, all the hospitals here and throughout the country, they have boards that are run by physicians and nurses, and they don't get paid for that. So, you know, there's, I guess there's, that's a difficult topic, you know. I mean, we want it for all the right reasons, but yet, if you have to incur all this expense to get the training, and then you'll never recoup that in your lifetime, well, then that's kind of, you're going to lose all those people that would be great physicians, you know.
Where do the funds come from to keep the medical schools operational?
That's a great question. In some ways, it's gotten back through, I don't want to say modern day slavery, because you are working them and they hardly get paid anything. So they kind of don't cost you too much. And in return, they can do a lot of the labor work and still kind of come out okay. There is a lot of government funding too that happens because they realize that we need trained people in all the medical aspects, nursing and technicians. But I guess I don't know the exact details, but those are some areas.
I mean, it's since changed, but when he was going through training, he did pull 30-hour shifts. I mean, I don't know about you, but my brain's not functioning after a certain point, you know, and I guess since then, I forget what year it was, but
my first year, my first day of internship, my very first day, you don't even know where the bathrooms are in the hospital. You know, that's how green you are. You're coming in there and you've given your assignment to patients, and you see them. Because of my concern, my over concern to be conscientious on the patients, but also my disorganization, I literally stayed there 3 days continuous without sleeping. It just took that long. And after that, I had a talk with myself and I said, how am I going to be doing this? How can I do this? How can I keep this up? It's just too much. And then slowly you get to learn how to do things a lot more efficiently, thank goodness. And you move on.
Cutting both ends of the pot.
Yeah.
With one slice. Can you tell us one of the most inspiring things about being a doctor that helps to renew that resolve?
Yeah, I mean, on a weekly basis, I get reminded of the benefits, not monetary, but you know, the benefits of, I just love dealing with the patients. Early on, I remember one of my first experiences, I was given this pager back when doctors used to use pagers. And I said, what's this? I already have a pager. And they said, no, this is a special pager. This is the pager for the hospital for if someone ever coded. Their heart stopped, their breathing stopped. And you're responsible for heading that team. You have to run to that patient and start to resuscitate them. Now we've had all the training, we know how to do it, but to actually go out there and do it, that's a completely different experience. And I just remember crying the whole time, just thinking how wonderful that you're given this knowledge to help someone.
I thought you were going to say how terrifying.
Oh, absolutely. Terrifyingly wonderful. But you know, just as you're there and you're shocking this patient, trying to bring them back and praying that their heart starts again, is just what a wonderful feeling that you can make a difference to this person, to this family.
I'm reminded and believe, I don't think I made it clear, but Mark's a gastroenterologist. And he has many of these stories, but I guess one lady who had come in with, she'd been suffering for 20 years with some kind of digestive issue. But, you know, not all of her previous gastroenterologists could not help her or find out, you know, what was the root cause of her distress. And, you know, Mark took the time to look through her charts and finally figured out, you know, what the problem was. This was, you know, many years ago, so I don't remember the details, but, you know, the fact that this lady who had been in discomfort or pain for 20 years, and then finally someone figures out what the heck is wrong with her, you know, by prescribing you the right medication, or I don't know if it was a procedure that had to be done, but, you know, there's that kind of power or satisfaction, I'm sure, you know, in making a difference in someone's life like that.
The advantage you have if you're the second or third doctor on is that they've already done a lot of the work for you. You know, they've done all the tests, they've ruled out this other disease, so it makes it narrows down the field.
I want to thank you, Mark. What a wonderful talk that you shared. I'm really touched with your irreversible resolve and your dedication and love to what you do. It's like, especially during this COVID time with all the doctors and nurses putting so many hours in and trying to save people and so overwhelmed with the love and dedication of what they do. And I bow to you and thank you for reminding us of the love that you share with what you do and the gift that you are to your clients, but also to the world, to just say this is important, and that it does take to be able to go forward when you lose someone. You can't save everybody, and realizing that when you lose someone, then you have someone right there next that you have to go forward with. And it reminds me of our own irreversible resolve. What are we dedicated to in our lives, and what do we dedicate ourselves to make the world a better place, or to even just by living, and because we're all one. But it's like, what are we doing? And the example of your father doing the marathon, and just the resolve to really, you know, to say, if we really want to do something, you put the energy in and you do it. You know, you can do it. And it's just a wonderful example. And I just really honor you and thank you for sharing today.
Thank you.
Yes, indeed. You know, we have someone online. I don't know whether they're able to join us audibly, but Robert Moore was a nurse for many years. And I just wondered, Robert, are you there able to tune in with us?
I am here.
Great. You did a lot of work in Santa Barbara Rehabilitation Hospital, I believe.
Yeah, I worked in rehabilitation medicine. But I think I just was thinking about, you know, reimbursement. The doctors I work with had, you know, they were 20, 30 years down the line, they're still paying off their medical loans. So it's like being in medicine now, unless you're in some plastic surgery or some high impact field, you know, doctors deserve what they get, in my opinion. But anyway, but what did you want me to?
I wondered if you might talk about, since you did stay in it for decades yourself, what were some of those experiences that fueled your resolve? And I'm also going to be asking Alex. I know she's in the medical profession as well.
Well, the deal was I never dreaded going to work. I always liked going to work. That's a reward. I mean, because you actually have a way that you found that you can maybe help people. And even if you can't solve their problem, sometimes just the sharing and being there as a fellow human being can be helpful. And, you know, it's not just the patients, it's the patients have a family. And then also for me, I was part of a team, you know, physical therapy, occupational therapy, physical therapy, rehab doctors, recreational therapists. So it was really pleasing to be part of an entire team that was involved in someone's recovery. That would often mean that their life would be changed irreversibly for the rest of their life. And for me, I think about those people, especially now that I'm retired, and I just can't believe how courageous they are. I mean, what they have to deal with the rest of their lives compared to what most of us have to deal with, it's just extraordinary. Anyway, I won't go on and on.
So your patients inspired you.
Yes, exactly.
Alice, do you have some thoughts you want to share with us?
My career kind of had a two-part. The first part, I used to be a pediatrician. Before I became a radiologist, I was a pediatrician. And I spent my entire time as a pediatrician in the Air Force. And then part of my time as a radiologist in the Air Force. For me, the thing that kept me going on is really as a pediatrician, especially I was a pediatrician in Okinawa, Japan. And I was taking care of families. Some of the parents were 18, 19 years old. And I wound up kind of being a secondary mother to them. They didn't really know a lot about childcare. They were on the other side of the world from their families. You know, it was that kind of thing. And you just thought of, you know, I really made a difference in someone's life today just by educating the parents. And then, of course, when you diagnose someone, or there's that time where you just walk away thinking, I saved that person's life. And that's just a phenomenal and sort of overwhelming feeling. And then I switched into radiology because it kind of was where I always wanted to be. I was sort of pushed away from it by my medical school because they wanted primary care physicians. And in radiology, to me, it feels more academic. I deal with the physicians. I don't really deal with patients that often. And in fact, I'm sort of working on and off at home. I'm literally in my house doing my job because I can do it on a computer. But, you know, there are times where, you know, I find something that makes a big difference in a patient's life. You know, our thing with being radiologists is we have to be able to visualize and understand the pathology. And one time I used to teach at the medical school, the military medical school, and one of the medical students came up to me and said, "Thank you for diagnosing my son." No one could figure out what was wrong with him. He had a strange imaging finding and strange physical findings, and I was able to say what it was. And, you know, as a radiologist, we really don't get a lot of feedback from patients anymore, so that doesn't really contribute as much to the resolve as kind of just being able to help the primary care provider know how to treat their patients. A lot of my radiology career was also spent in education, so I did a lot of writing of articles and lecturing and things like that, and just this feeling of knowing that I'm making a difference by teaching a next generation of radiologists. That was, you know, it's just something that kind of keeps you going on. Sorry, talking.
Good, thank you. I know that David Sanders is a healer in some ways, doing body work, and there may be others of you out there that I don't know about your role as healers. Maybe somebody else knows, but if you have something to contribute, or maybe you're on the receiving end of some healing that you might want to mention in the last little while we have here together.
I think I was going to ask earlier, you know, if there was something in Dr. Morisaki's personal life that challenged him with maintaining that irreversible resolve, but I think you did share some of that, and I appreciated hearing those personal stories, you know, that really, I'm sure has helped to shape you, and hearing about your father. You know, we only got bits and pieces of him being in an orphanage and then moving on to medical school. I can only imagine too that, you know, how much resolve he had within himself to choose a path that was significantly better than his upbringing. So I'm sure, I wonder if that was, you know, a part of your inspiration as well to keep that torch burning. But thank you for sharing.
Absolutely, it was you know, inspiration to me, also kind of a depression to me too, that he had achieved so much. The kind of running joke in our family was, you know, how sometimes children follow in their parents' footsteps. Well, the running joke is it took six of us to follow in his footsteps, because he had achieved so much that. Yeah, he was quite an example. He is quite an example.
Yeah, I've never seen anyone that, you know, putting his mind to a task or something and then achieving it. It's really crazy. I mean, as the things that I mentioned show, you know, and a lot of, well, taking the marathon, for example, I mean, at 78 and not in really good, you know, physical condition, literally, I imagine he just willed his way, you know, each step of the 26 miles. But, and I know a lot of running is mind over matter, but still.
And he's just a lifelong learner. He, at one point, he got up one day and he said, you know, I haven't studied calculus in quite a while. I think I'm going to start studying that again because it's important. You know, and Alice, I greatly appreciate your field and all the help that it's done to all us people here.
Wonderful. Well, let me call upon David if I could. Any reflections that you might have, David, and also if you'd like to close out with a little vote of thanks to Mark and Doris as well.
Well, I went off on a completely different tangent, just the whole notion of being driven to something so inspiring that you wouldn't quit. And it left me wondering what on earth I'm committed to that level of resolve. And so I'm just left in that question. I don't see where I've found that in my own life, but see it in others. And certainly the medical field, I'm very greatly, very appreciative of having been the recipient of medical help 2 times in my life, and both times was ready to check out. And magically, you guys did your work, and I'm still here to tell you about it and to say thank you. And thank you for the presentation. And Doris, thank you for being such a I've heard that expression, behind every great man, there's an even greater woman. So I certainly see that in you two. And thank you for your dedication. Thank you from all of us.
Yes, indeed. And thank you all very much for joining us, in particular, the Morisakis. Thank you, and aloha.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Renee, for your irreversible resolve, keeping this going. Thank you so much.
My pleasure.